Welcome to another War Game rule review here at Little Wars TV. This week we are going to be taking a look at Combat Patrol. This is a platoon level set of World War II rules written by Buck Surdu, published in 2015. Steve and I are going to do what we always do here and look at 5 basic categories. You can see those on the screen right now, and as you'll notice, they are all weighted a little bit differently.
Okay, well, our first category is presentation. How do the rules look? How do they feel? How are they written? I think it's a bit of a mixed bag with Combat Patrol. As you can see here, the hard copy version of the rules, they're stapled in the middle. They do lay flat, which I do like. And the paper's sturdy enough, but honestly, there's nothing particularly special about it. The illustrations, to the extent that there are illustrations, aren't that bright. There are some examples of play. Again, visually, not that great. But the thing that kind of bugs me the most, I read a lot in my job, and so I'm very attuned to things like font and size and
being able to read words.
Yes. Yeah. I really disliked reading these rules because of the font choices and the way the pages were laid out. And it just got to hurting my eyes after a while, which is unfortunate because actually the rules are really well written. I think Buck, who has written a lot of different rule sets, really knows how to write a rule set that teaches you how to play it. It felt like my eyeballs were going to bleed at times reading this. And then when you get to the vehicle details in the back...
You can't read them. You literally can't read them. They're so tiny. I don't know what size font this would even be. Is this like size 3 font? Like on word processor or what?
It could be. It could be. You really would benefit from using a magnifying glass. So, presentation... It gets some positive points because the rules are written so well, but I have to deduct so many for the other things. I only end up giving it a 5.
Yeah, if I had to describe the presentation of Combat Patrol in 2 words, it would be below average, which on our scoring metric would be a 4. Yeah. I do agree it is very, very well written, so that's why I'm going as high as 4. Alright, our next category is playability. This is one of the 2 most important categories. It's worth 30% of the rules, and that's because this is where we talk about how easy is it to get into the game, how quick is it to play, to learn, what's the barrier to entry like. And this is a really interesting mixed bag, I think, on Combat Patrol. Let's start with some of the good elements. You can play this with any scale figures that you want. You don't need a lot of table space. Really, you could be on a 4x4 table, a kitchen table if you wanted. Could go much larger, and we have here at this club. Also, you don't even need that many miniatures. I would say that at most you're looking at a platoon of figures here, so maybe 30 to 40 models, but we've played games with just a couple of squads on a side and had a great game.
Yeah.
So the barrier to entry in terms of what you need to play is low. Unfortunately, something else you need to play are custom cards, and a lot of custom cards. We'll talk more about how the cards work in the mechanics section, but right now, let's just suffice it to say that you're going to need special Combat Patrol cards, which are sold with the rules. They, of course, increase the price of the rules, because you gotta pay for these cards, and these are cards that you're only ever going to use for Combat Patrol.
Right.
So their use is limited, so I think that impacts the playability. Also, we'll talk about the mechanics section. This is a very, very unique game. There are some extremely original and innovative concepts in here that really, I think, make it a little bit harder to learn than your average game. So I think that negatively impacts the playability. You're not just going to crack this open and be up and going in 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think you raised some good points. I've actually played more games of Combat Patrol than anyone else in the club. And I've been the one that's kind of been teaching people at the club how to play. And so, I kind of end up on the other end of the spectrum from you, Greg, in the sense that I am familiar with it, and I've gotten used to the things that are very, very different about it. And once you do that, and it doesn't really take long, once you do that, this system really plays smoothly.
So once you know how the game works, playability is very high. But you would benefit from having someone to teach you. Somebody taught you at a convention, you taught all of the guys here at this club, and I'm just thinking from the perspective of if you don't have someone to teach you, if you're going to just read the rules on your own, there's some different concepts here.
There are some different concepts.
I found this, I have no idea what you scored for playability. I found this to be the toughest category to score for Combat Patrol because there are a lot of factors weighing on both sides. I ended up going with a 5. I ended up going with average. I think once you've gotten a couple games under your belt, it's probably going to be a lot higher than a 5. But to get started, I split the difference.
Yeah. Well, you focus more, as someone who's newer to the system, I think you focus more on that initial push. So I completely understand the score you gave. As someone who has a little bit more experience with the system, I actually did end up going higher. I actually went with an 8 because I do think once you've pushed through that initial barrier, which doesn't take long.
Right.
It doesn't take long to spend $50.
Nope. That one click. Yeah.
And spend maybe half an hour of actually playing the game. It runs very smoothly, so I gave it an 8.
All right, next category is mechanics, and I suspect, buckle up, because I think we're going to spend maybe a couple of extra minutes here in mechanics, because Combat Patrol is
all about the cards.
It is all about the cards and some concepts that you probably have never seen before in any other game. Let me start by saying that this is not an I go, you go game, where one side moves all their troops and fires and then the other side does the same. Combat Patrol uses a separate deck of cards. You want to pick that one up and show us? This is an activation deck, and Steve can show you what's on these cards. They're just numbered, 1 through 6. Because what you end up doing in this game in order to start a turn is you roll a separate d6 for every team or every weapon element that you have on your side of the table, and you put that little d6 out there to remind yourself what they rolled, and then we start flipping cards. So if the first card that gets flipped in a turn is a 1, any unit out there that has a 1 is going to get to activate from both sides. And of course, this deck has multiples of every number, which means that you're going to have the opportunity, potentially, to activate multiple units multiple times. And as you might expect, there's also a break card in here, and when that card comes up, the turn is over. So maybe you'll have stuff that didn't get to go at all. And also, this is, through the activation deck, is how that there is a differentiation between more experienced troops and less experienced troops. Right. An early criticism here in mechanics, actually one of my few criticisms on the mechanics side, is that I'm not a huge fan of the lack of ability for you as a player to command and control your units. It is, when the card flips up, that's what goes. It's not your choice as a player, so if you're trying to implement a plan, there's only one way that the rules allow you to do that, and that is that your platoon commander also rolls a die. He gets his own special die. He is allowed at any point, one time in the turn, to swap his die with another unit. So that gives you a tiny bit of ability to do something that you want to do. Otherwise, I feel that there's a level of randomness here that takes away from my ability to make tactical decisions.
There is a bit of randomness, however, it's the kind of randomness that you can plan for. I think that you can look to that die switching mechanism, and you have to be able to manage the chaos. There's a little bit of chaos management.
Yes.
Something that is talked about a lot in the board games industry. But I think there's some value in a system that doesn't allow you to do everything that you want to do when you want to do it.
Absolutely. But the deck of cards that we showed you right there for activation, that is just a small taste of what you're going to get for card play.
No, the true masterwork here, and I don't use that term lightly because this is a tremendous achievement. I mean, what Buck has been able to do in designing what are the player decks and the decks of cards that you use when you're actually firing or moving.
Everything.
Everything.
You use this deck of cards for everything.
Every result you need is contained in these cards. And that's because they have a lot of information on them. We'll show you some close up. But
let's start with movement.
Yeah.
If you want to move, you flip a card.
You flip a card based on the experience level of your troops. You will move different amounts. and there are different amounts for each experience level and different amounts on each card.
Right, and as you said, they are going to be a little bit randomized, so you never know exactly how far your unit's going to be allowed to move, which I like in a system like this. I do like that.
And then, you know, if you want to take a shot at somebody, this is a war game. You're going to want to shoot at people at some point. Whether you hit or not, your result is reported here. But not just the result is on here, but every single modifier to your potential to hit is also on here. And it's, you know, it works in, you know, what level of troops, again, the quality of your troops is on here, whether you've moved while firing or prior to firing, whether your target has moved,
right,
the ranges,
cover.
So,
you know, we'll get you a close-up of these cards. There's tons of little symbols on the card, which when you look at it for the first time, to be honest, looks a little crazy and extremely intimidating, because you're like, what the hell are all these symbols? In very short order, by the end of really your first game of Combat Patrol, you'll know everything that's on the card.
The first game I ran at the club here, it wasn't even by the end of the first game. It was by the end of about 2 rounds of firing. Right. People were flipping over their cards. You know, we as war gamers who are used to rolling dice, we understand that there can be drama in the die roll.
Yeah.
I actually think there's a little bit more drama in the drawing of a card and then flopping it down and showing, okay, I just killed your machine gunner.
Having played, I kind of agree with you. There's a lot of excitement when you're getting ready to flip that next card.
I don't want to say that it's narrative, because you're not necessarily telling a story, but as you go through each one of these steps, and you see which guy's potentially going to get shot. Maybe it's your platoon leader. Well, I know he's in the forest. Is the next card going to have a guy under a tree? I mean, you actually do get into it, and I think it's very effective.
Yeah, what we both just have to admit is that the way that he designed all of these cards to fit together to a perfectly sort of interlocking system where you can do this mechanism and make it work, frankly, is, I don't know how many years it must have taken to design this, but it's brilliant. I have never seen anything like it. The originality, the innovation that's involved in this, regardless of how well you think you like it, it's incredible.
Well, and I think
major credit to him.
If you have watched any of Keith on the channel here, who obviously designed Disposable Heroes,
and is a hater of card-based activation,
and specifically has said on camera, on record, he's on record as saying he can't stand card games. And when Buck, asked if we would be willing to review this, and full disclosure, he did provide us with a copy of the rules and the cards that we're using, so we'll make sure that's out there. He said, I don't know how much Keith's gonna like it, because it's a card game, because he was obviously familiar with it. Yet, I ran the game where Keith played for the first time, and at the end, my favorite quote from Keith was, "There is no reason I should like this game, and yet I do." Because and he recognized, and I agree, and it's the reason I said the cards were Buck's masterwork.
Brilliant.
It's absolutely brilliant, and a really, really impressive achievement. So whatever criticisms we have, keep that in mind.
What did you wind up scoring this mechanically?
I ended up the mechanics are important. I do like the mechanics, but there are those couple things that just kind of dragged it down a little bit, so I gave him a 7.
Okay. I have a number of criticisms about the mechanics, but I'm actually giving it a 9 out of 10 because I just feel like you have to give extra points for the originality of this system.
All right, so our fourth category is historical flavor. I actually think that the historical flavor is pretty darn good in this game. I get the feeling that when I'm playing the game in the World War II era, when you look at the chaotic situation that you can have when small units are running into each other, and the way that you are activating units and can use the individual models there in a way to model small unit tactics, and sometimes have that opportunity to coordinate, sometimes not. I really felt like I was playing a World War II skirmish game, so I gave it an 8.
Wow, okay, that's certainly higher than me. If I'm looking just a little bit more at the core rules, felt a little bit generic to me. The historical flavor was fine. I think part of my hesitation really comes back to the criticism I made at the beginning of the mechanics section, where I was talking about your relative inability as a player to affect coordination of your units. And if I'm looking at historical flavor in a platoon level World War II set, then I want to be a platoon commander where I have at least some limited ability in order to coordinate my forces. So I went 5 out of 10 on historical flavor. All right, last category that we'll talk about here is support. I think this will be a pretty quick one, and the long and short of it is that it's outstanding. The support offered for Combat Patrol by Buck, I think, is great. There is a dedicated website with a ton of information on it, free information. Unit rosters, data cards, scenarios.
Army organization.
Right, Army organization. Also, he has a couple of YouTube videos that kind of teach you how to play, which I know when we were talking about playability and I mentioned there being a barrier to entry to learn, there are some YouTube videos.
Buck is there for you.
Yeah, you should watch them. They will help you. So I honestly would be inclined to go 10 on this, but the website, if you look at it, reminds me so much of the rules in that it was not laid out by a graphic designer or anybody with design touch, so it's a little bit clunky. So I'll go 9. 9 out of 10. It's outstanding.
Yeah, and maybe I dinged him a little bit more for that website, which is not pretty. But the information is there, and there is a lot of information there.
Yes.
I also, I don't know if you can't recall whether you just mentioned it, there is a Yahoo group for discussion. Buck is also very often found in places like TMP. So there are places that you can go to get answers. I also kind of look at, for support, you don't just rely on the authors, you rely on other players.
Right, the community of players.
And it doesn't seem to me like the community for Combat Patrol is really all that huge.
No.
And so finding other players from which you can ask questions and stuff like that may not be the easiest thing in the world. So I knock another point or so off for that. So I give it a 7 on support. But I do think that Buck should be lauded for the amount of free stuff that he throws out there for Combat Patrol players.
All right, as we move to our final review, we'll sort of recap our scores and see where we landed. But before we get to that, we'll ask the question we always ask, which is, would you pay X for this rule set? In this particular case, it's a bit unusual because of the cards. The rules themselves, if you're just going to buy these, I've seen online for about $20, but honestly, you have to have the cards. That's a must. And the bundle pack right now could be had from On Military Matters for $50. That gets you a copy of the rules, print copy, as well as the 2 starter decks that you need for a 2 to 4 player game, leaning 2, I would say.
2, yeah. And you get the activation deck as well.
Right, and you get the activation deck. So everything that you would need for an introductory game, you can get. It's $50. What are your thoughts on the price?
Well, I'll say that they are good quality cards.
Yes.
But I feel that $50 is a little steep for the whole thing, particularly if you haven't played the game before. You're not sure whether it's going to be right for you because it is very, very different. And
right.
I know that there are going to be some people who are just like, I can't stand not rolling dice. I'm not one of those people, though. So while I can say that maybe $50 is a little bit steep, if you can get printed up versions of the cards plus like a watermarked PDF version of the rules for like $35.
Right.
And I think that is much more reasonable. And I think is a good price point for what this rule set offers.
So even more reasonable, I think, would be if you just buy the cards, $30 print on demand. Buck on the website that we mentioned under the support section, he has a free PDF that is just the introductory, very basic rules for Combat Patrol, none of the advanced stuff. That's a great way to get started and to find out if the game is for you. And it's, for much less than the $50 price tag. So I definitely would recommend that if you're not sure, because, $50 for any game, it's a lot.
Right.
There's no question.
Sure.
So, final score. When you tally up your weighted score, where did you fall? I fell at a 65, which, if you haven't watched any of our rule reviews before, sounds awfully low, but based on our weighting system, 60 or above would be a game that we recommend you try. So I'm at a 65.
Yeah, and I actually, when I added up my scores, and this really didn't surprise me, to a certain extent because I expected it would fall in this area. I got a 73. What did surprise me a little bit is looking back over the ratings that I've given other rule sets that are addressing this particular time period and this particular scale of action. It's actually the highest score that I've given for a rule set. We don't have a category for fun, which we've joked about.
Right.
Because we are supposed to be having fun with all of this, right?
This one I think would get a thumbs up in the fun category.
Absolutely.
Because we've had a blast.
And every player I've had in each of the games that I have run here at the club since we got the rule set, by the end of the night, has said...
That was awesome.
That was a lot of fun.
So now that you know what Steve and I think of the rules, you can head over to our website, littlewarstv.com. You can see what some of the other club members who have played games of Combat Patrol here in our club have to say about it. Check out their scores and their comments as well.